Respected ladies and the gentlemen, as a retiree and a new immigrant from China, who bring with him the unforgettable experience and the lessons learned from the living through the China's grand socialist experiment in the last century, as well as one who participated in the initially successful but ill-fated reformist movement in China undertook in the last few decades. I would like to share some observations and ideas with you, which I hope will give you a new perspective about what is currently taking place in the United States. Thus, we can see, without God's enlightenment, how the human rationality has gradually got into failure. As we have continued to move away from our faith in God, our collective misunderstanding of true freedom and equality has also continued to grow. Thus, humanity is becoming trapped in the mud of welfarism deeper and deeper, beginning with the countries in Europe and now even in the US. During the last several decades, as people have continued to search for liberty without meeting the personal obligations necessary to support their freedoms, they have created more labels for different groups of people in order to justify why each group may be entitled to more rights and fewer obligations. It's in this context that humanity has started to become more biased, so much so that people have gradually started to be their basic understanding about cause and effect, a logical system created by God, namely that you must work hard to live a good life. Instead of working harder to build a better life, these divided groups started paying more attention to taking it to the streets to ask the government for increased social welfare benefits. In this emotional charged environment, they created using their God-given free will. People have turned away from their historically strong faith in God and have subsequently lost the ability to be thankful. Now, they see themselves as victims in society. This wave of self-victimization is infectious, plaguing more and more of our population, and it is seized by the opportunistic social organizers to further label people into various groups such as women, minority, LGBT groups, or teachers and workers in the special industry sectors. In order to seek revenge from the perceived hurts, they angrily declared their demands, organized massive protests in the downtowns of metropolitan areas. In many cases, there were legitimate reasons because they were actually treated unfairly. But in some cases, there was not enough legitimacy. Yet, there still amassed a large following of people through the mainstream media and social media platforms just to show their influence. Thus, when they gained more rights without equally meeting their obligations simply by going on protests, their success acted as a testimony and a catalyst to other labeled groups who were also fighting for their own rights without obligations. lawyers, politicians, and mass media companies make good use of collective movements like this for their personal gain by racking up advertising revenue, which makes the situation even more complicated. Protests and demonstrations have become the most popular forms of dialogue, replacing peaceful negotiations and cooperative conversations in many countries. Demanding extreme liberty without meeting one's personal obligations is harmful for every one of us in this society. People protesting for more government welfare and other political gains without obligations has resulted in serious problems for our society. People play roles in society. Therefore, it is easy for anyone to be given some sort of label, assumption, and seek affiliation with diverse social groups. However, as a result of people moving away from their faith in God, somebody have unconsciously removed gratitude from their hearts, and now only focus on receiving more without thinking about what they can give back. Anybody can find countless inequality they have suffered in life and think of themselves as a victim. This way, anybody could be labeled as part of diverse groups of victims and organize themselves to fight for their own entitlements. People like to say, this is my right, that is my right. But nobody ever asks, what are my obligations to society? People like to shout, this is unfair, that is unfair. But nobody ever says, this needs my contribution, or that needs my commitment. I am by no means against charity and people helping one another. In fact, I have spent more than 20 years of my career as a volunteer to help alleviate poverty in China and given aid internationally. When people receiving help from other individuals or non-governmental organizations, it fosters appreciation, and they in turn may feel the desire to pay the forward when they can. But the problem is, when the government is only entity to line out assistance, people lose their sense of gratitude and they start to feel like they deserve it. Many people have lost their modesty and humility and like to boast about what they are doing. Our society is full of the awful egos and arrogance. In the face of so many demands for entitlements from differently labeled groups, fewer and fewer politicians still persist in adhering to the God-given fundamental principles of fairness and justice. In contrast, most politicians like to ingratiate themselves with various labeled groups to win voters. While representing taxpayers, these politicians generously promise the voters that they should be free or that should be free, but they never talk about who should pay for those free things. In recent decades of European history, these kinds of politicians have gradually given away the nation's future in order to meet the current welfare requirements of voters. Nobody cares about the nation's future except God. once the huge ratchet of welfarism began to operate, it is nearly impossible to stop. People require more and more free things. The government gets into bigger and bigger debt from the borrowing money from our future. Taxes from citizens and companies increase, and taxes revenue collected is distributed to people through scores of social welfare programs. Because taxes are too high and labor resources are become idle, entrepreneurs gradually escape from the country with more welfare to those with less welfare. Finally, some nations collapse economically, waiting to be bailed out by their allies in this globalization-crazy world. What happened in Greece and Italy in the last decade are both examples of this. Today, in most European countries, tax rates have reached as high as 40 to 50%, and the total debt of several countries have reached as high as 300 to 700% of their annual GDP. Nobody knows which country will suddenly collapse in the future. I always ask myself the question, why does the United States want to follow the welfarism footsteps of the European countries? Welfarism practices in the last few decades verify that when we do not lead our lives with faith in God, believing that He will provide for our needs, it is impossible for us to exhibit right public spirit in order to then manage ourselves in a rational manner. It's time for us to return to God in order to fill our hearts with gratitude once again, so that in turn we can correctly live out the true public spirit ideals of liberty, obligations, equality, fairness, and justice. It's time for us to blow the whistle at the United States of America in order to stop ideological and social trends of welfarism. Thank you very much for your listening.